All right, everyone, how's it going? I had a request to do a quick video over Chapter 10 just to give you guys the pertinent information. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Hope everyone's doing okay. A lot of fun on Friday in the trivia. They do want me to add some of these marks to Maplewood, but I'll give you guys some more information about that early next week. So make sure you go into your Google Classroom, make sure things are submitted, because I am going to assign, I think, a big summative mark for your basic participation in this and have to wait a little bit, but still going to think about that, and we can revisit that here in the next little bit. So share my screen. You are presenting your screen. Okay. So economic and environmental impacts of globalization. Chapter 10, economic globalization. So really, globalization, right? We've been looking at this now for 9 chapters. You kind of understand that it's this idea that the world is connected in many different ways. Economics and trade and products, really kind of started that process. We looked at the Silk Road, we looked at kind of trade routes and stuff like that. And it evolved into what it is now, where you have systems like Amazon and eBay, where you can ultimately, have things sent around the world just by clicking a few buttons on a computer. You're good to go. So economic globalization is this idea, and really the study of business on an international level, how it's kind of fair, how it's unfair, how they try and regulate it, and basically what that encompasses. So what is economic globalization? So refers to the increasing interdependence of world economies. So that means they need each other, these different world economies, so China, so USA, so Canada, as a result of the growing sale of cross-border trade of commodities and services. So things like parts, things like the resources needed to create those parts, to put into vehicles, okay? Flow of international capital and a wide and rapid spread of technology. So flow of capital, that's the money being passed from the United States to Mexico to Brazil, all over the place. And then that spread of new technology. So if you look at my example that I have right here, you can see that this is where Toyota, look at where all these different factories are. They have multiple factories around the world, right? But they all run under that same product, Toyota. This is a prime example of economic globalization because, again, you have the same company, transnational company, right, that has now spread itself all the way across the world, is being built in different places, right? Now, some of the issues that tend to arise from this is if I'm looking at, say, Brazil versus Canada, because of our rights, our systems, what we pay our workers, what we value our workers at, the difference in cost is always going to be really crazy and really different. So that's where you need regulation, and some of these different government programs I'm going to show you guys here in a second. These are the ones that come in and they regulate this trade to say, okay, just because you in Brazil can make the car for 10 cents compared to the United States that have to spend $1 because we have to pay our workers properly and whatever, we have to find a way to balance that so it doesn't create an unequal system and the world can basically function in that way. Okay, so what led to globalization? So a new international monetary system. So at the end of World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement, would be something to underline and know what that is, established the rules for a new international monetary system. Okay, so international monetary system, so all of the world money system. System was based on each country's gold reserve. So at the time, it wasn't based on these imaginary dollars, okay? It was actual gold bars and what you had physical gold to your country, and that's what you could trade with. The system was abandoned in 1971 by the US, due in part of their large debt caused by the Vietnam War. From then on, the value of a country's currency would be based on the foreign exchange market, so what it was worth in other countries. This value is usually determined by a country's economic strength. So some of the most valuable dollars that we have in the world, American dollars, okay, the euro is also worth a lot of money, Swiss francs. So again, your country's value is dependent on its economic strength. So the more money, the more ability, the better your economics are, the more valuable your dollar is on a global scale. Okay, so you can take a second and watch that. But this creation of a World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, what the International Monetary Fund does now is it actually lends money to countries that are in need. So the bank of all banks. Some people, some conspiracy theorists would say that this is like Illuminati type thing. These are the guys who control the world. These are definitely the guys who control all the money in the world, right? And so if you think about the effects of money and how it tends to control things in our world, yeah, they have a pretty massive stake in a say, at very least, in what's going on. All right. So the World Bank was created with the Bretton Woods Agreement, and the UN agency, by in practice, is independent and controlled by its 184 members, oftentimes of different countries. Okay. So they say it's independent, it's not political, right? So the World Bank provides loans to less developed countries that are in financial difficulties. In return, these countries must meet certain political and economic conditions. Okay. A freer market, human rights, paying their workers a livable wage. All those things need to be met if the World Bank is going to lend you money. Okay, so the International Monetary Fund was also created with the Bretton Woods Agreement. It's also attached to the United Nations, but independent in practice. So again, it's got to do with some government political powers, but they try and keep it as neutral and independent so they can make unbiased and fair decisions for where the money is going to be allocated in our crazy world. Okay, the IMF lends money to countries who are in extreme short-term difficulty. So in return, these countries must also adopt capitalist reforms. So we're not often giving money to communist governments where the government controls everything. Okay. So you can see here, and these are kind of dated statistics, but just a GDP, so your gross domestic product, so your national wealth. You can see that what these different countries kind of portray here is the blue is your assets, your money, right? What you have. Okay. And your red are your liabilities. So the things that you have to pay for, like your product almost, and you make your money on top of that. So if you see that little black line right there, it says net worth. So you can see that a lot of these countries are actually their net value. So what they owe versus what they need to spend is below zero. And a lot of times it's below zero. In Canada, the United States, we run massive deficits almost every year, right? So you understand. So it's very complex, really, to understand. But just at a basic level, most countries run in the negative. They mostly run in debt to the International Monetary Fund and the bank of all banks. Okay, you can see that the best and some of the best countries, right? Like if you look on this kind of thing on the right here, China, they absolutely kill it. They crush it. And why is that? They have a communist country. They have 1/3 of the world's population, and they don't have that same materialism, that capitalism that we do as a country, right? Their people don't need the same types of things, so they don't spend that same amount of money. So you can see their net worth is far beyond ours, right? The United States, Canada, we owe money to China, right? But again, different systems of politics. So is it fair, right? So capitalism, right? Remember that it takes money to make money. The more money you have, the easier it is to make money. So at the end of the Cold War, so this was between the Soviet Union and the United States, Russia, Poland, East Germany quickly embraced capitalism. To get rich is glorious, they said China's leader at the time. So cheap manufacturing goods and outsourcing services. So India, the second largest country in the world, also embraced capitalism. So you started to have these situations where these massive countries were producing products for way lower, right? So in China, communist country, they didn't have to pay the workers the same. And it still happens to today. A lot of our technology comes from there. It's massively because they don't have to pay their workers the same, so they can produce products that are way cheaper than what we can produce them for. They then outsource them to our countries to be sold. Okay. So another major contribution to this economic globalization is technology, obviously, right? With technological advancements, it's easier to transfer money from one place to another or from one currency to another. I've bought things from people in the United States. They can send it to you. You can do business transactions. You can purchase homes. You can do anything you want these days using the computer. Okay, creates an electronic herd. Profitable investments attract more money. Funds that lose money lose investors. Like a herd of cattle, investors can easily be spooked by rumors. This can have a big impact on the currency and economy of a country, especially smaller ones. So what your technological development is and how are you communicating that to your public, okay? So these two guys in a typical social classroom and what we would be doing, you'd have to know these guys a little bit more detailed just because, sorry, be some questions on the test about them, but just a quick overview. A lot of these guys were perceived as the guys who kind of started capitalism and the way in which money functions in our Western society. So this guy's name is John Maynard Keynes. He's perceived as the most prominent economist of the 20th century. He was in favor of government intervention in the economy to lift the economy out of recession, right? So free capitalism, let the businessmen make all the decisions until it crashes, then get the government involved to straighten things out and regulate the money. One of the main figures behind the Bretton Woods Agreement between 45 and 80, his theories are applied to many governments, and Keynesian economics, they call it, right? Keynesian economics. Doesn't always work. They call it stagflation, so economic slowdown, high unemployment, and high inflation. So if you want to Google that guy, see a little bit more if you want to go into a little bit more detail, you can. We would have done a little bit more in class, but this is Keynes. This is Hayek, Friedrich Hayek. So he promotes economic liberalism against socialism, government intervention, and totalitarianism. So according to him, we have to deregulate, privatize, reduce, and simplify the social structure programs, diminish protection against unemployment, cut housing subsidy programs, abolish price control and farming production control, and reduce the power of unions. So this guy is right-wing. This guy is about as conservative as they come, right? He's saying, let the business people decide, let them go nuts, right? Stop giving money to the poor people. Housing subsidies, those are like welfare housing programs for different people who live that don't have as much money as everyone else. Social security, so all things meant for poor people, right? He says, get rid of all that. Let Darwinism take place and let the poor kind of, suffer, fall off. So his theories were adopted by U.S. President Ronald Reagan and more kind of recently Trump, Margaret Thatcher in the 80s as well, but Trump as well, very much opposed to having the government support poor people, okay, and support people that are less fortunate, refugees, immigrants. A lot of that stuff is based and kind of routed in economic policy, which is crazy, right? My economics state that I can't help you out when you're down. Excuse me. My economics state that we can't have a public healthcare system in America because that's not the best of my financial interest, right? It's crazy to think about. Okay, so these are a couple of programs and kind of agencies in place that regulate trades and tariffs. So in 1947, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was established to help the global economy by opening up trade between countries. Okay, so they started to regulate it, right? They couldn't let the unequalness of it all take place, and so some of these companies came in to start to regulate. So it operates according to 4 principles: conducting trade in a non-discriminatory manner. Okay, so no discrimination. Treated importing goods similar as domestic goods. Protecting domestic industries through tariffs. So what a tariff is a tax. And so what a government can do is say, okay, China, even though that you can sell me this iPod for 60 and I have to go and buy it for 200 from Canada, I can put a tax on you so it's the same price when it comes over the border. It's called an import fee or a tariff. Okay, so present a list of tariffs and trade restrictions to others. So it is, like I said, this is a very basic overview. It's ultra complex, but all these different things have tariffs on them. So a good example would be aluminum. The aluminum tariff and steel tariff is about 25% that America put in originally because they weren't competitive in their pricing. And so when Trump came into office, he said, listen, I'm putting a tariff on this. It will equalize it. Really, it's a tax on the consumer and the manufacturer. But ultimately, the way that it settles it is it's just a fair way, that they're trying their best to regulate a massive global trade, which is just growing and growing as time is going on. Okay, next up, the World Trade Organization. You'll see this, throughout the course of your social studies career here going forward. And in the news, if you read about this stuff, World Trade Organization, you can assume that they regulate international trade. Okay, so 90% of international trade, and there's 131 member countries that take place in all the main ones, all the big ones. Okay, so the North American Free Trade Agreement, this is called the USMCA now. This was recently renegotiated by Trump in his first little bit of time in office. Originally it was 1989, North American Free Trade Agreement, and it's changed now, right? It extended to include Mexico in 1994. And so what it is, it's our North America, right? So it's Mexico, United States, and Canada, and the way that we do trade. We border those countries, so trade's a little bit easier. It's cheaper. You're not shipping things across the world, right? So we do have trade agreements set up because, again, Mexico is a way lower GDP, right? They don't pay their workers as much. But then you look at Canada, we have really high taxes and strict social programs that require government financing. So again, you have to have deals in place that try and balance it and make it, kind of fair for those three countries participating in that trade. Okay, so a couple examples here of free trade in Canada. So positive, it's improvement of trade, right? You can get different, cooler stuff from different places. Similar to the Silk Road back in Unit 2, right? The idea that you could get resource or get something new from another place and have it where you are, right, is awesome. So freer trade, opening of world markets, again, same kind of concepts there. Improvement of quality of life. I guess if I get my sneakers from Paris and it makes me happy, that makes my quality of life better, and it encourages productivity. So again, competition globally now, I can have a product that I make here in Fort McMurray that I can sell anywhere in the world, right? So it encourages you to go outside and advertise and try and kind of spread to globalize your product. Okay, so the negative effects, and something that we'll get into here, is the environmental effects, right? Basically, everything you see in this picture to the right is devastating to the environment, from shipping ships to airplanes being one of the worst, right? To those trucks that probably contain, we'll say, food, right? Factory farm food, factory farming, all of it is terrible. The way in we treat animals is terrible because of this, dependent on beef and meat and chicken and poultry, and our infatuation with fast food and convenience. It has absolutely devastated our environment. We'll get into that in these next couple chapters here, but that is absolutely an effect of this economic globalization. The environment has taken a pounding, right? And to a point where we may never be able to save our planet. Like, we have to really put our faith in science that they develop things to help our ozone and to reduce the carbon emissions in our atmosphere, because we're going down a bad path right now as far as the environmental effects of trade and what we do on the open market. And we'll look at that a little bit more in detail, but that's a big subject that I care a lot about. Okay. Loss of sovereignty. So again, you're not so much just Canada anymore. You're Canada, yeah, you're a Canadian, there's a border, but again, all of your stuff is coming from everywhere, right? Your music, your clothes, your food, it's all now just a global, everything is intertwined. Everything is working together, interdependent, interconnected, okay? It threatens small business. So Walmart always trumps mom and pop shop, like we've talked about. And unfortunately, America, they're kind of the brand capital of the world, right? They are the biggest economy. They are, supercharged with capitalism, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. I'm not huge on America, but American control is ultimately what is coming. Economic imperialism, they control a lot of the markets, right? So just is what it is. All right, so that's the end of chapter 9. You guys have a bit of a poster that I'm just asking you to choose 2 of these organizations we talked about today, describe them, answer a few questions based on them. You do have the ability to work in partners. No, I'm not going to require you to show who did what. That's all good. I don't need any of that. So you can just go forth, crush that, and I will talk to you guys on Monday. Got to figure out how to stop recording now. 1 second here. Oh, I'm presenting. Stop presenting. Oh. Okay, it says recording. Now I'm going to stop recording. All right, see you, everyone.